Hello, and welcome back to Banjo Strings and Drinking Gourds, How America Culture Came to Be, the podcast of the Frontier Culture Museum of Virginia. I'm Alex.
And I'm Rachel. Today, our topic is forgotten holidays in history. We're going to discuss some of the weirder holidays that are rarely, if ever, celebrated today. Some of these you may have heard of, and others you may not.
Let's start with one that people are probably somewhat familiar with if they've been to the museum in the past 5 years or so. Lammas, or Lunasad, is an Old English or Celtic take your pick, as the church adopted some of the practices, holidays that mark the start of the harvest and celebrates the hard work done during the year. Typically celebrated on August 1st, the museum until recently emphasized field and grain activities on this day.
Yes, Lammas can be traced back to the Celtic god Lu, who was the god of craftsmen or the sun god, either way an important part of the harvest. Lammas itself was celebrated by the Anglo-Saxons, which endured as an important holiday throughout the Victorian period and remains a part of the Anglican Church calendar. The early Christian traditions blessed the first bread made with the first harvest of wheat. The Hlafmes, or literally loaf mass, was a ceremony to bless the bread, which was then torn into fourths and placed on the corners of the barn to protect the harvest. Corn dollies or wheat leavings were also made from the straw of the harvest and kept throughout the winter to bring good luck for the next year's harvest.
An interesting facet of Lammas is that it was a set holiday in the calendar. Now, you may be thinking that environmental factors and other things might cause a farmer to have to harvest the crop early. It was considered very bad luck to have to harvest the wheat earlier than the start of August, because that implied mismanagement of the previous year's wheat harvest, as in using too much of it. This indicated poor economy in the household and was a source of censure in a close-knit village community. A farmer carefully lived by the season, so it wasn't actually a stretch to have set planting and harvest times. Of course, with climate change, we're seeing all sorts of difficulties with the harvest, but that's another issue. Another factor is the calendar changed in the mid-18th century, so August 1st, for most of when the British celebrated Lammas, was 12 days in the future.
Here's a holiday that few people have probably heard of, Hansel Monday. This is essentially the Scottish Boxing Day, but set after New Year's instead of Christmas. Nowadays, it's celebrated on the first Monday of the year, but in the Julian calendar, that was after January 12th, as Alex just mentioned. In both Hansel Monday and Boxing Day, gifts are given to servants, tradesmen, children, or people to whom one owes a debt.
Hansel is Anglo-Saxon to deliver into the hands, which really just makes sense for a holiday based on gift giving. Now, there are some interesting traditions regarding what people actually should give or not, as the case may be. Knives or anything sharp are definitely a bad idea, because it will eventually sever your relationship with the recipient. Silver, on the other hand, is always a good idea because that brings good luck to everyone. This is why it was traditional to give a coin, a piece of cake, and a drink to your servants or subordinates.
A very nice tradition I think we should bring back for employers to use. There's a story in the Everyday Book, published in 1825, that, quote, it is related of one William Hunter, a collier, that he was cured in the year 1758 of an inveterate rheumatism or gout by drinking freely of new ale full of barm or yeast. On the evening of Hansel Monday, as it is called, some of his neighbors came to make merry with him. Though he could not rise, yet he always took his share of the ale, as it passed round the company, and in the end became much intoxicated. The consequence was that he had the use of his limbs the next morning and was able to walk about. He lived more than 20 years after this and never had the smallest return of his old complaint. End quote. Now, the next holiday is Plough Monday. This is the opposite end of the calendar from Lammas. Plough Monday was the first Monday after Epiphany, January 6th, thus ending the Christmas season and beginning the farming season.
This English tradition typically included farm laborers disguising themselves with soot and going from door to door dragging a decorated plow behind them. They'd shout, "Penny for the plowboys" at every stop. The money collected for their efforts was used for either the maintenance of plow lights or candles lit in the church to bless the fields, or upkeep of communal plow used by the poorest of the farmers. Some of these traditions, especially the plow lights, were abandoned after the Reformation, but others lasted far into the 19th century. William Horne, in the Everyday Book, writes, In some parts of the country, and especially in the north, they draw the plow in procession to the doors of the villagers and townspeople. Long ropes are attached to it, and 30 or 40 men, stripped to their clean white shirts, but protected from the weather by waistcoats beneath, drag it along. Their arms and shoulders are decorated with gay colored ribbons tied in large knots and bows, and their hats are smartened in the same way. They are usually accompanied by an old woman or a boy dressed up to represent one. She is gaily bedazzled and called the Bessie. Sometimes the sport is assisted by humorous countrymen to represent a fool. He is covered with ribbons and attired in skins with a dependent tail and carries a box to collect money from the spectators. They are attended by music and Morris dancers when they can be got, but there is always a sportive dance with a few lasses in all their finery and a superabundance of ribbons. When this is merriment is well managed and is pleasing. The money collected is spent at night in conviviality. Then Plough Monday reminded them of their business, and on the morning of that day the men and maids strove who should show their readiness to commence the labors of the years by rising at the earliest. If the ploughman could get his whip, his ploughstaff, hatchet, or any field implement by the fireside before the maid could get her kettle on, she lost her shrove-tied cock to the men. Thus did our forefathers strive to allure youth to their duty and provide them innocent mirth as well as labor. On Plough Monday might the farmer give a good supper and strong ale. In some places where the ploughman went to work on Plough Monday, if on return at night he came with his whip to the kitchen hatch and cried, "Cock on the dunghill," he gained a cock for Shrove Tuesday.
This follows with the 16th century couplet by Thomas Tusser of Plough Monday next after that 12th tide is past, bids out with the plough, the worst husband is last.
Yet another delightful English lost holiday is St. Crispin's Day. Many people are mostly familiar with St. Crispin's Day via Shakespeare and Henry V's St. Crispin Day speech, with the famous line, "We few, we happy few, we band of brothers." St. Crispin's Day, October 25th, is the feast day of twin Roman saints, Crispin and Crispian, patron saints of shoemakers. Various parts of England celebrated differently, but it almost centered around shoemakers, cordwinders, and cobblers. William Horne, in the Everyday Book, recounts an interesting story about the Emperor Charles V and St. Crispin's Day. The Emperor, Charles V, being curious to know the sentiments of his meanest subjects, concerned himself and his administration, often went incognito, and mixed himself in such companies and conversations as he thought proper. One night at Brussels, his boot required immediately mending. He was directed to a cobbler. Unluckily, it happened to be St. Crispin's holiday, and instead of finding the cobbler inclined for work, he was in the height of his jollity among his acquaintances. The emperor acquainted him with what he wanted and offered him a handsome gratuity. "What friend," says the fellow, "do you know no better to ask one of our craft to work on St. Crispin? Was it Charles himself? I do not a stitch for him now. But if you'll come in and drink St. Crispin, do and welcome. We are as merry as the emperor can be." The emperor accepted the offer, but while he was contemplating their rude pleasure, instead of joining in, the jovial host thus accosts him. "What, I suppose you are some courtier, politician or other by that contemplated viz, but be you who, what you will, you are heartily welcome. Drink. Here's Charles V's health." "Then you love Charles V?" replied the emperor. "Love him," says the son of Crispin. Aye, I love his long noseship well enough, but I should love him much better would he but tax us a little less. But what have to do with politics? Round with the glasses and merry be our hearts." After a short stay, the emperor took his leave, and thanked the cobbler for his hospitable reception. "That," he cried, "you are welcome to, but I would not have dishonored St. Crispin today to have worked for the emperor." Charles, pleased with the good nature and humor of the man, sent for him next morning to court. You must imagine his surprise to see and hear his late guest was his sovereign. He feared his joke upon his long nose must be punished with death. The emperor thanked him for his hospitality, and as a reward for it, bade him ask for what he most desired, and take the whole night to settle his surprise and his ambition. Next day he appeared and requested that for the future the cobblers of Flanders might bear for their arms a boot with the emperor's crown upon it. That request was granted, and as his ambition was so moderate, the emperor bade him make another. If, says he, I am to have my utmost wishes commanded that for the future the company of cobblers shall take place of the company of shoemakers. It was accordingly so ordained, and to this day there is to be seen a chapel in Flanders adorned with a boot, an imperial crown on it, and in all processions the company of cobblers takes precedent of the company of shoemakers.
One of the most interesting regional celebrations of St. Crispin's Day was that effigies of townspeople who misbehaved were strung up in the town center on St. Crispin's Day and hung there until November 5th. This is fairly coincidental, as November 5th was, of course, the commemoration of the failure of Guy Fawkes and the Gunpowder Plot to blow up Parliament in 1605, and from 1625 was often celebrated with the firing of effigies of political or religious, often Catholic figures. Nowadays, it is often celebrated with guys or effigies of Fawkes. Whether the older St. Crispin's Day tradition informed the Gunpowder Treason Day tradition is unknown, but likely.
Another interesting holiday long forgotten is St. Clement's Day, or Old Clem's Night, November 23rd, was St. Clement's Day, honoring Pope Clement I, the patron saint of metalworkers. Going back even further than 99 AD, when Clement died, there was the Germanic figure of Wayland the Smith, who is celebrated by modern pagans on November 23rd, or thereabouts, blending the two figures in an opposite of what usually happens with Christian holy days. Thus, this was a raucous holiday for blacksmiths, much like St. Crispin's Day was for shoemakers. Dressing up in costumes and going door to door for treats like ale and fruit was looked forward to all year by apprentices. St. Clement's Day comes once a year, give us some apples or give us some beer. The shindig kicked off with the firing of the anvil, where the blacksmiths packed a hole in the anvil with gunpowder, plugged with a fuse, and hammered it until it exploded. This pretty much made a homemade cannon, and as you can imagine, caused many injuries over the centuries.
And now for a totally different type of holiday. The German springtime Halloween type celebration of Walpurgisnacht falls on the eve of May 1st. May Day or Beltane, depending on your calendar, is a major mark in an agricultural year as a change of the season and was celebrated for centuries before Christianity was brought to Germany. Why is it called Walpurgisnight? Because of St. Walpurga, who was canonized for her efforts against German paganism in the 8th century. She was said to be canonized on May 1st after her death, thus her feast day is assigned around then. Unfortunately, witch hysteria comes in waves, and during the peak of the frenzy of seeing witches everywhere in the 17th century, St. Walpurga's Day became associated with protection against witchcraft. It also resulted in burning a lot of innocent people to death. Herbal medicines and practitioners were often the most accused out of a lack of understanding and general hysteria. This is extraordinarily ironic, as St. Walpurga is also known for her ability to heal people. Bonfires on April 30th with burnings of effigies and making loud noises are still continued to this day in Germany, but didn't make it across the ocean with the colonial immigrants.
Here's another religious holiday that was more popular for its traditions than the actual religious celebration. Michaelmas was the feast day for St. Michael and the archangels or all angels dependent. Celebrated on September 29th marked the end of the harvest season started on Lammas. The main tradition is to eat a goose that has been fed on the stubble of the grain fields on Michaelmas. There's a saying that goes, eat a goose on Michaelmas Day, want not for money all the year. There was also a tradition of making a larger than normal loaves of bread or a special St. Michael bannock or oat cakes to celebrate the end of the harvest. It was kind of like an early English Thanksgiving, if we ignore the troubling aspects of American Thanksgiving like colonization and the exclusiveness and radical Puritans and focus on the food. There was also a lot of superstitions about Michaelmas Day. For one, and relevant to the goose eating, if the bones of the bird after roasting were brown, it would be a mild winter. If white, the winter would be harsh. It was also the last day to pick blackberries, as apparently the devil landed in them after Michael kicked him out, and every year the blackberries are cursed to be unlucky on Michaelmas Day. In Ulster in the 18th century, Michaelmas was a quarter day, or the day to pay the quarterly rent. This started a tradition of tenants presenting landlords with a goose on Michaelmas, especially if they wished for a little leniency in paying their rent. The day following Michaelmas was the day for so-called mop fairs, or when farm laborers went to look for temporary jobs, bringing all of their tools with them. This holiday did come over to the colonies with Christians, especially Anglicans and Catholics, so it's still celebrated today with religious and liturgical calendars, but not as a public holiday.
Meal Monday, on the other hand, is one that I'm glad we've done away with. From the 17th to the 19th centuries, students in Scottish universities basically had to provide everything for themselves: wood or peat for the fire, their own bedding, and most importantly, their own food. Given the distance between these august bodies of learning, meaning St. Andrews, Glasgow, Aberdeen, and Edinburgh, and students' typically rural homes, certain Mondays were given off as a long weekend so students could travel home to refill their larders, especially oatmeal, which was both plentiful and cheap. Oatmeal forms the basis of many Scottish receipts, especially the easy and filling ones like simple porridge. It's still observed as a long holiday at the ancient universities, this coming year being February 13th. But at least the students don't have to travel just to stock up on oatmeal, or even eat oatmeal at all if they don't want to.
12th Night is a holiday that's often overlooked, especially since it's right after Christmas. Of course, in the 17th century, this would have been very well known, even if Cromwell's government did ban it during the middle of the century. Twelfth Night, made famous by Shakespeare's comedy of the same name, encompasses the 12 days between Christmas Day and Epiphany, January 6th. Often this was the only real holiday many people had from hard work, as there was little to do in the fields at this time of year in Europe. The night before, or on Twelfth Night Eve, people would light bonfires, sometimes 12 of them, and the yeoman farmer, family, friends, and servants would then bless the winter wheat with cider. Various regions in England had different traditions, but one amusing account reported in Hone's Everyday Book was from Herefordshire, where a large cake with a hole in it was brought down to the ox house. Each ox was toasted by name, then the cake was placed on the horn of the first ox. If the ox threw the cake off behind him, the lady of the house won a prize. If it was thrown in front of him, the ox keeper got the prize. The company then went back to the house and had to sing carols at the locked door until they were let in. Of course, every Twelfth Night itself was celebrated by twelfth cake and wassail. Bakeries made a special display of their wares for the day, and everyone looked forward to games, dancing, and general merriment at the houses of friends on the evening. The cake itself was cut into pieces that may contain a coin for wealth, a bean for the king, a pea for the queen, or something in that nature. These festivities carried into the 20th century for England and the mid-19th century or antebellum for the United States. Of course, the sad thing about January 7th was the return of daily life. Laborers went back to work, and school children had to return to the schools they had bared out when they locked the teacher out of the schoolhouse at the start of the holidays.
Midsummer long marked a celebration of some sort, whether it was just marking the passing of the season or an excuse to have a break from the labors of agricultural work. Nearly every European culture has had some sort of celebration. There are often superstitions involving midsummer that have become part of the traditions. Many of these superstitions have to do with finding love. Many also have to do with sleeping. For example, one Northumberland tradition was to put a branch of orpine, also known as midsummer men, in your room overnight. Depending on which way the leaves bent the next morning, you would know if your lover was staying true or not. Another tradition was the dumb cake, in which two girls make, bake, and break a cake, staying silent the whole time, and a third girl places the pieces under their pillows. They will then dream of their true love. At midnight, if a girl went out to sow hemp seed and chanted something like, "Hemp seed I sow, hemp seed I hoe, and he that is my true love this hemp seed shall mow," she could see an apparition of her lover behind her. Or, the farmer laborer who came to actually mow the hemp would be her true love.
There were many more historical holidays and celebrations that faded through time. Most of these, you'll notice, were agriculturally centered, and as most people shifted away from needing to follow an agricultural calendar, these festivals died out. There was also influence by the Reformation. Given that the majority of the holidays were saint days, these were looked down on as problematic and papist. At other times, modern events or interpretations took over on older holidays, like Groundhog's Day, replacing traditional Candlemas, also February 2nd, where hedgehogs indicated the coming season.
So, obviously, this was only a brief overview of some of the holidays that have been forgotten in time. Obviously, there were many, many more holidays and celebrations that people coming to America would have celebrated, but either got lost and out of context in a new setting, or just became not necessary. As Alex was saying, once you no longer follow an agricultural calendar, you don't really need to celebrate things like Lammas. The most fascinating thing for me is to see how some of these holidays have coalesced and combined to form new holidays that we are much more familiar with. So we hope you enjoyed Banjo Strings and Drinking Gourds. We bring you historical episodes twice a month. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're in the area, be sure to check out the Frontier Culture Museum's evening lantern tours. These are 2-hour evening walking tours by lantern light, where you'll be entertained in several of the historic buildings by holiday sketches. Tickets are on sale now and they go fast. Be sure to reserve your preferred date and time soon.
Thank you.